Good morning, I'm Gretchen Ho. It is a Wednesday, the 25th day of June, bringing you Morning Matters because your mornings matter. Let's get to the stories that matter today. Prosecutors are urging the International Criminal Court to reject former President Rodrigo Duterte's request for temporary release. They argue he poses numerous risks and must remain detained to guarantee he faces trial and does not obstruct justice. Tel Aviv is accusing Iran of violating the ceasefire and vows to retaliate after missiles struck Israeli cities only hours into the truce. While Vice President Sara Duterte has submitted a formal response to the Senate summons, the House prosecution team believes it is an evasive tactic, arguing she is exploiting legal technicalities and loopholes to avoid the substance of the impeachment. Welcome to our program, Morning Matters, where we talk about the issues you need to know for the rest of your day. Now, first on the agenda. Just hours into the ceasefire, missiles rained down on Israeli cities once again. Now, Tel Aviv is accusing Iran of breaking the truce and has promised to strike back. Here is the report.
Israel's military has confirmed that a ceasefire is now in effect, carried out under the orders of its political leadership. This comes after U.S. President Donald Trump brokered an agreement aimed at pausing hostilities between Israel and Iran. Shortly after, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced on social media that Israel had agreed to Trump's proposed truce. Despite this, Israeli forces remain on high alert, bracing for the possibility of renewed missile attacks. An Iranian official has likewise confirmed acceptance of the ceasefire. Though earlier, Iran's foreign minister insisted there would be no cessation unless Israel stopped its attacks. President Trump in turn urged both sides to honor the agreement. But just hours after the ceasefire was made public, sirens were heard across Haifa, Israel. Then came explosions, this time near Tel Aviv and Beersheba city. Israeli media reported that a residential building had been struck. The missile strike killed at least 3 people and left widespread destruction, with rescue workers still combing through rubble for survivors. In retaliation, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz ordered military strikes on Tehran, claiming Iran had violated the ceasefire. Iranian state television, however, denied any breach, saying the last of their missiles were launched before the truce took effect. As the conflict deepens, nuclear experts warn of a more alarming issue: the likelihood that Iran is edging closer to building nuclear weapons.
So what the IAEA found just before they sort of made the declaration, is they've got 400 kilograms of 60% enriched. That would give you sort of 300 odd of 90% enriched for your bomb. You need about 25 kgs for a bomb. So they, potentially they had enough material for 10 bombs. What's not known is, have they converted the 400 kgs of 60%, which the IAEA saw, have they converted it to 90%? If they did, it's of the form of UF6.
Since Israel's June 13 strike on Iranian nuclear sites, the International Atomic Energy Agency has been unable to conduct inspections. Adding to global tensions, Iran's parliament is pushing to close the Strait of Hormuz, a key transit point for the world's oil supply. The move, however, is still pending approval from Iran's Supreme National Security Council.
U.S. President Donald Trump accuses both Israel and Iran of violating the ceasefire just hours after he announced it. Trump had announced the ceasefire earlier on Tuesday with a post on Truth Social saying the ceasefire is now in effect. Please do not violate it. Later in the day, Trump told reporters Israel launched its strikes almost immediately after the agreement was reached. Trump added that Iran and Israel had been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the blank they are doing.
I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have 2 countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
The first batch of OFWs repatriated from the Middle East amid the ongoing Israel-Iran conflict arrived last night. A total of 31 OFWs returned home, 26 from Israel, 3 from Jordan, 1 from Palestine, and 1 from Qatar. Each OFW receives 150,000 pesos in aid, along with airport assistance, medical services, and reintegration support. More than 300 out of over 30,000 OFWs in Israel have already requested repatriation so far.
We do receive calls, our embassy, our offices, OWA, and DMW. But after those calls of initial repatriation, we call them back if they are really sure that they want to be repatriated. So based on those calls, we have confirmed, of course, the first 26, and then this additional 50, and then another 20.
The government is ready to release fuel subsidies for the public transport sector as soon as oil hits $80 a barrel. The Energy Department has listed down alternative routes in supplier nations such as the United States, Canada, and Brazil, if and when their so-called worst-case scenario happens. Now, on Tuesday, gasoline stations nationwide implemented the first tranche of this week's price hikes, ranging from 1 peso and 75 centavos to almost 3 pesos a liter.
There are several scenarios. One, the most positive is that it will not escalate anymore and the prices will continue to go down. Today is a good day with $69 per barrel. It can escalate. The worst scenario is they close the Strait of Hormuz. If it gets cut off, then that's not only for the Philippines, bad news for the Philippines, but the whole world actually. So we've been discussing different scenarios from worst to best.
U.S. airstrikes fell short of destroying Iran's nuclear site, setting it back only a few months. That's according to preliminary intelligence. To discuss this and more, we are joined this morning by geopolitical analyst Richard Darian. Good morning to you. Thank you for being with us on Morning Matters.
Morning. I'm still waking up. Yes.
Okay, a furious Trump is the image of this morning. He hurled an expletive towards Iran and Israel for breaking ceasefire, and he seems to be, on the surface, that angry parent scolding his children. How does this all seem to you?
Well, I mean, I think President Trump was clear that he was disappointed with both sides, but I think what really caught everyone's attention is how he emphasized his disappointment, if not rage, with a key U.S. ally whom he was supposed to support. So if you really listen to this, and in fact, over Twitter in the past 6, 7, 8 hours, we saw many people on the side of Israel, especially some of the more hardline elements, expressing disappointment, to put it mildly, with President Trump's dedication and really this kind of forceful push to end the conflict. I think we were having some conversation yesterday because there were a lot of people who were asking about whether this is true, this is not. I said, if you read in between the lines, there is going to be a ceasefire. Always the ceasefires are going to be difficult. In fact, what tends to happen if you watch the movie All Is Quiet on the Western Front, if you read about the First World War, the most aggressive offensives tend to be before the ceasefire kicks in because some of the hardline elements want to get the punches through. Parang sa boxing yan eh. Kung alam mo na andyan na yung bell, at tingin mo hindi mo nakuha yung gusto mo, dun mo na i-throw yung mga punches. And I think in many ways, Trump wanted to project himself as a referee. Let's not forget, just a few days ago, he met a top general from Pakistan who said that his country is going to nominate President Trump for Nobel Peace Prize because, at least according to Trump and the Pakistani side, I don't know about the Indian side, Trump played an important role in bringing about a ceasefire between India and Pakistan, two nuclear-powered states. And now, of course, Trump is claiming that he has been able to end this, he calls it the 12-day war between arguably the two most powerful militaries in the Middle East, Iran and Israel. But I think, to be fair also to President Trump, I mean, these were really sleepless nights for a lot of people, including for President Trump. You're talking about time difference, you're talking about operational difficulties, you're talking about really back and forth between different sides. Remember, Iran and Israel do not have direct relationship diplomatically. Iran does not recognize the state of Israel as a sovereign state. Iran and U.S. also don't tend to have really a full-fledged normalized bilateral relationship. So really this ceasefire kicking in itself, some would say, was a diplomatic miracle.
So for you, the United States really had to get into this war to be able to stop it. Did President Trump do the right move when he bombed the nuclear sites of Iran?
Well, I think international law is very clear that you cannot just go there and bomb another country's facilities if you feel there's something wrong, or I mean, that's why you have the International Atomic Energy Agency. That's why Rafael Grossi, the head of the IAEA, has repeatedly said do not target nuclear facilities. Remember, targeting nuclear facilities could create radioactive and other very, very dangerous effects that could affect civilians. Let's not forget hundreds of civilians across Iran were killed, according to some reports, including minors, children, and women. So, there's going to be a lot of discussion about international law and the humanitarian impact of this. But what is also very clear right now is that the latest report, as you mentioned correctly, and again, we predicted that. We have been saying that for quite some time because all experts said, some of these facilities like Fordo, they're so deeply buried into mountains. Iran is one of the most mountainous, if not the most mountainous country, that really taking them out is going to be extremely difficult. The bunker busters that the Americans used, they were never used in a war scenario. They were just tested, in a non-war scenario, in simulations. And based on the reports coming out, including from the U.S. intelligence agencies, it looks like they were not really able to destroy, for instance, the Fordo facility. And the situation right now is that people also don't know. Maybe Iran actually took out the highly enriched uranium. You don't know where they are. There are thousands of other mountains across Iran. Iran is in a position to build other similar facilities, if it may not have already built those facilities. So operationally speaking, I'm not sure what really was achieved, in a sense that the nuclear program may have been set back only by a few months, according to U.S. intelligence. The Iranian regime held true despite the initial tactical success of the other side. They reconstituted right away, which tells you about the robustness and resilience of the state institutions. So actually now, to be Churchillian about this, we saw the end of the beginning, meaning all of those years of shadow wars and threats and all. But we're entering a new phase of even greater uncertainty, whether about the fate of the highly enriched uranium that Iran was able to achieve before these latest bombings, whether it's about Iran is open to make more concessions diplomatically after everything that has happened, and whether the U.S. has an appetite really for more military intervention, because clearly President Trump was not interested in forever war and putting boots on the ground, because you cannot change countries and regimes from air. And we just saw another proof of that in the past 12 days.
It's exactly why I'm asking if it was necessary for the United States to get into this, to show some sort of strength with their bunker buster bombs, instead of just brokering the ceasefire from the beginning on a diplomatic table. I mean, if you take a look at it, now we have so much uncertainty over whether this will push Iran to the other side to actually develop that nuclear arsenal, given the defensiveness of Israel, of the United States, against it, and just and wondering if the ceasefire that we're seeing now, the peace that Trump tried to broker, is temporary. It's just short term in nature.
Well, they say war is the continuation of politics by other means. So there are a lot of people that are also looking at optics and politics and how domestic political calculation were also at play here. I think for President Trump, considering the influence of some would call the hawks or neoconservative elements, very robustly anti-Iranian regime elements in the United States, I think he felt pressured eventually to do something about the situation. But it was very clear from statements from J.D. Vance, even from Pete Hegseth and other top officials, that the U.S. was not interested in an Iraq war situation. And that, what they wanted to do is to supposedly show an overwhelming force that would forever solve the problem. But again, operationally, technically speaking, I think all the intelligence shows that the Iranian nuclear program is still there. Not to mention the nuclear scientists and experts. There are thousands of them. You cannot just take them out. And Iran is, one of the most advanced countries scientifically, technologically, one of the highest IQs in the world, if you look at all of the data. So I think some would say politically Trump felt compelled to do something, but operationally speaking, well, I think the intelligence reports speak for themselves. Some would even say that politically speaking, Netanyahu also had an interest, in doing something about the situation, at least from his perspective. And I think he might soon call for snap elections because he might have felt that his popularity is going up. So I think we should not forget also domestic political calculations, aside from calculations and operational calculations here. And the reality is that war, especially in our era of social media and memes, is also unfortunately partly theater. And we saw also that some part of this war was theater in the sense that there was pre-notification, there was some coordination. And that is why, thankfully, as we predicted on different show, on the big story the other day, there would be calibrated de-escalation, or at the most calibrated escalation, because the worst case scenario would have been closing of the Strait of Hormuz, and basically you'll go into what some would call the Samson option, whereby Iran would risk its own oil exports capability, if not more, if it were to close the Strait of Hormuz and really target U.S. bases across the Persian Gulf. We should have completely alienated its friends and its Arab neighbors in that region. We didn't go down that path. I think, and the big reason is not only that didn't Iran want to escalate this further, President Trump was also very interested in ending this as soon as possible.
Well, let's not forget that Trump went on with the strikes on Iran without consulting his Congress. What do you think would be his non-negotiables, talking about domestic politics, in order not to lose his MAGA crowd? What should he not or compromise? I mean, when he's towing the line, ano ba yung hindi niya i-cross? For example, you mentioned putting boots on the ground. How far do you think President Trump would go with his, in your language, jiu-jitsu, conflict, political jiu-jitsu?
Very good observation. I mean, I never thought I would so intently follow, tweets by Marjorie Taylor Greene and Congressman Massey and Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon. I mean, these are like the big names in the Make America Great Again movement, and a lot of them have been very, very vociferous in their opposition to opening of hostilities between Iran and the United States. They're very much about, America first. We might love our allies, but America first. And people are forgetting J.D. Vance. I mean, as you can see there in the video, J.D. Vance is wearing a different necktie color, which some people were also trying to read into it. I mean, you can look at his facial expression. You can look at how he was positioning himself. Some would say that J.D. Vance was perhaps not totally sold on this, or at the very least, he was quite worried that this could get out of control based on his own experience. He served in the Iraq War. He saw how there's so-called mission creep. You might want to start with one mission. Next thing you know, there's another mission. Next thing you know, you're there for 20 years and spent trillions of dollars and lost thousands of lives. And J.D. Vance was very clear the other day that regime change was not on the table. In fact, he even said Iran and U.S. were not at war. This was really about the nuclear program operations. So I think at many levels, there are many MAGA leaders who were extremely worried about escalation. And I think they're very much welcome the cessation of hostilities. But I think everyone knows, fundamentally the situation perhaps has not dramatically changed. Each side is going to stick to their own guns in the coming months and years. And therefore, I think the push right now by Congressman Massey on the Republican side and Rouhana on the Democratic side is to reassert the power of the Congress. The reality, however, is that if you study American foreign policy over the past 50 years and look at a lot of literature on that, like the Power Wars, for instance, book by New York Times columnists on the Obama era, the U.S. presidents actually enjoy a tremendous amount of latitude in terms of engaging in external military operations. In fact, the war powers of the Congress could be sometimes mitigated or curtailed by the president when they refuse to even call a military operation a military operation. I think we had one example during the Libyan Gaddafi operation, whereby the U.S. engaged in some military operation, but President Obama did not describe it as such, and therefore did not provide the legal basis for the Congress to come in. So if the Congress wants to reassert its power, there has to be really some sort of major consensus there. I just don't see that because the Republican leadership under Speaker Johnson are very much aligned to President Trump. President Trump still has tremendous amount of influence over the Republican Party. The Democratic Party, let's see what direction it's going to take. That's why everyone is watching the New York elections, mayoral elections, because the race between Como and Mamdani could also say something about what direction the Democratic Party wants to take, including on foreign policy issues, considering how Como and Mamdani have very different takes on a range of conflicts, including these latest conflicts in the Middle East. So what I'm saying is that, yes, in the MAGA movement, among some Democrats at least, there's this sense that things could get out of control and that there has to be a push for reassertion of congressional power. But many stars have to align before Trump can get legally and constitutionally curtailed on this. And President Trump was also very defiant. He challenged AOC Ocasio-Cortez, go ahead and impeach me if you want, because he's quite confident about that not going anywhere. But nevertheless, I think what we have seen is that because of the horrors of the Iraq War, because of the ignominy of America, the way by which America had to withdraw from Afghanistan just a few years ago, after 20 years of all of the blood and treasure they had to expend on that, really unfortunate nation. I think the Americans are really not interested in picking another major forever wars. And in the case of Iran, you're talking about a country more than 4 times larger in population than pre-2003 Iraq, and a country that has proven its ability to bounce back from very, very difficult initial tactical setbacks, as we saw almost 2 weeks ago. So now the difficulty starts. If we go back to the negotiating table, what is the U.S. going to offer? Are they going to offer really something major in terms of sanctions relief and some sort of normalization? And in exchange, will the Iranians be agreeing to, giving up completely their enrichment capacity? Because the issue here is not nuclear program. Iran has an operational civilian plant in Bushehr, close to the south of the country. But will the U.S. allow for any kind of enrichment? I think we're going to see a lot of rounds of back and forth on this, because I think the Iranians may be open to freezing their enrichment capacity for confidence building for quite some time. And maybe both sides could sell that as some sort of a good opening. But after everything Iran has gone through, and after the resilience they have shown in terms of their program and even militarily, some would say, will they just, agree to some more maximalist concessions? That's difficult to see. But then again, Gretchen, nothing is impossible. This ceasefire, let's be honest, many people were very, very skeptical that there was even a ceasefire. We don't know whether it will hold, of course, but the fact that we, at least in the past, 12 hours or so, we have not seen major bombings and all, that's maybe there is indeed a commitment to some sort of a more durable peace in this part of the world, because just the stakes are just so high, Gretchen.
Well, it seems to be there is some truth to that ceasefire after all the questions about its veracity. But you're right, it is fragile, and we will see what happens on from this moment. In the meantime, maraming salamat. Thank you so much. We have geopolitical analyst Richard Haydarian weighing in on the conflict in the Middle East. Don't go away. We'll be back with more stories right after the break. Good morning, I'm Gretchen Ho, and here on Morning Matters, we talk about the most pressing issues and give you the context behind the headlines. The House prosecution team has received Vice President Sara Duterte's formal response to the Senate summons. Here is the report.
The House prosecution team has received a copy of the answer ad cautelam submitted by Vice President Sara Duterte in response to the writ of summons issued by the Senate Impeachment Court. The prosecution is now reviewing the content of VP Sara's arguments, in which she asserted that the impeachment case against her is void ab initio, or invalid from the beginning. Duterte emphasized an alleged violation of the Constitution's one-year ban on filing successive impeachment complaints. However, the House prosecution team believes the Vice President is merely deflecting the issue by using legal technicalities and looking for loopholes in the impeachment process.
Those who cannot face the facts, those who cannot prove the substance of their defense, resort to procedure. Hindi yung ginawa ho yung sinabi ho nung legal team ay all conclusions. They're all conclusions. Ang gusto namin, factual and legal basis. Wala ho yun sa sagot eh. Paano? So saan ang direksyon natin? Ngayon, gaya na sinabi ko, kakulangan nila yun. Hindi nila sinagot yung factual allegations. On our part, we will proceed and address the factual issues.
Assistant House Majority Leader Jude Asidre shares the same sentiment, saying that VP Duterte appears to be avoiding the core issues raised against her.
Ang worry ko lang dito na ang panawagan for accountability ay nalulunod ng mga technicality. Siyempre, ang taong bayan, mas interesado po tayo hindi dahil kung na-violate yung 1-year ban. Ang mas interesado ang ating mga kababayan ay malaman kung saan ba talaga napunta ang paggastos ng confidential funds, saan po ba, kung meron bang pananagutan yung pagsabi po ng ating pangalawang Pangulo na ipapapatay niya ang presidente, ang unang ginang at ang speaker.
Prosecution panel spokesperson Attorney Antonio Bucoy also criticized VP Duterte's remark that the articles of impeachment were merely a scrap of paper.
Patuloy nilang hindi kinikilala ang jurisdiction ng impeachment court. So ito po hindi ho ito naaayon. So as if nagpali siya ng answer pero hindi niya kinikilala ang jurisdiction. May sinabi pa, dadagdagan ko po. Sinabi na ang articles of incorporation is a mere scrap of paper. In other words, basura. Kung basura, bakit niyo sinagot?
And joining us now to break down the latest developments is House Prosecution Spokesperson Attorney Antonio Bucoy. Good morning. Welcome to Morning Matters.
Good morning and thanks for having me.
The Vice President has answered the Senate summons as she calls this impeachment case a scrap of paper. She pleads not guilty and she says this is a clear abuse of the impeachment process. No statements of ultimate facts are in the impeachment complaint.
Okay.
What does the prosecution have to say?
Let's break down your question. Number one, she said it's a mere scrap of paper. Did she say why? To us, the scrap of paper are the liquidation documents like piatos, boy camote. These are scraps of paper. The impeachment complaint embodies the ultimate and evidentiary material facts constituting the charges. And these are serious charges. Threatening the life of the President, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House. Never before in the history of any country in the world has this been committed. Plunder, malversation, high crimes, betrayal of public trust. This cannot be considered as pamumulitika or persecution. Had she not committed these acts imputed to her, there won't be any complaint. Had she taken her oath when she was given the opportunity to explain this during the Quadcom hearings in the House of Representatives, we wouldn't have to go through this impeachment process. What's the other question?
Well, she says that there are no statements of ultimate facts.
Oh, these are all statements of ultimate facts and evidentiary facts. That's now the new requirement under the 2019 amendments to the rules of court. That not only do you allege the ultimate facts, meaning the material facts constituting the offense charged, but also evidentiary facts to ensure that these are not flimsy, these are not arbitrary, but this can be proven in court. These are all satisfied by the articles of impeachment.
Well, she had that Zoom press conference where she threatened to kill the president.
On live stream.
Does that hold as evidence?
Yes. She's
on the digital platform.
She's the worst witness. She's the best witness against herself, rather, not the worst witness. And she insisted, no joke, no joke. She stressed this not only once, but twice. And then she repeated this in a different occasion. If you will recall, there was another interview when she demonstrated how she would want to, or she imagined cutting the head of the president. So these are the confluence of all these actions are too blatant to be ignored. We cannot just brush this aside. The second highest official of the country making these threats is so gross that she should be made accountable among the other serious articles.
And the third thing that she said, that this was a clear abuse of the impeachment process. And of course, we do relate that with their camp saying that this was all political. Kumbaga, nagamit lang sa politika itong mga hearing na ito to get her out of office.
Kung nagamit lang ito sa politika, there won't be any evidentiary facts that had been laid down or laid out, or that were dug up during the Quadcom hearings. These are all based on documents, official documents at that. These are all based on testimonies of knowledgeable witnesses, some of whom are under the office of the Vice President or the office of the Secretary of Education. Hindi ito pamumulitika. Ang pamumulitika, you come up with a complaint from thin air, you cannot substantiate it, and you go to court. These are all based on evidentiary and testimonial, documentary and testimonial evidence.
Is the prosecution confident with the weight of evidence that it has?
Absolutely.
And when we say evidence, what evidence do you have exactly? Is it mainly on the confidential funds?
No.
Yung mga resibong nabanggit po nyo kanina, and also yung mga disbursements po niya, sabi po niya ito, no, Duterte said an appeal that challenges the Commission on Audit's disallowance of the disbursements remains pending, and there's no final decision by the COA declaring the disbursements illegal and or unjustifiable. That's from the COA.
There has already been a disallowance by the COA. I think she should update herself with the status of
But has
the
there
process.
been a final decision by the COA
It tends.
on the actions of the Office
It
of
tends.
Vice
But we don't even have to wait for that. We don't have to wait for that. That is not a precondition for
Pero
the...
hindi po ba trabaho ng COA po yun para
Yes.
mag-imbestiga dito sa mga
And they have
confidential
investigated.
funds? Oo.
And they have disallowed it. There's a finding.
The notices of disallowance, you mean?
There is a disallowance, yes.
Which they asked the Vice President's office to explain, right? So the
The Vice President already explained, and it has not been, that was not acceptable to COA. That's why there was a disallowance.
So there's a final decision already.
I think, yes. Unless she appeals it.
What other evidence does prosecution have without preempting so much
Yes.
with what you can say?
The evidence of plunder, everything is on record. For instance, the amount of 112 million was disbursed in a span of 11 days without any explanation. The amount was handed over to 2 military men under her charge. Her instruction was for the disbursement officer to give it to them without any explanation, and she just did it. The amount vanished into thin air. So, like I said, without preempting what would go on to trial, let's leave it at that for now.
So the strongest case that the prosecution has would be on the confidential funds.
The strongest-
And the confidential fund use.
We have firmed up our evidence, so we're confident that in each and every article, we could secure a guilty verdict.
Buo na ho ba ang prosecution team?
Yes.
Ilan po ang miyembro?
We have in our team 12 public prosecutors. These are the congressmen, the lawmakers. Two did not, two unfortunately did not get re-elected, and they are now getting replaced
Dan
by
Fernandez?
yes,
And-
the incoming lawmakers, Chel Jokno, are coming in to join the team, plus Laila de Lima.
Sino po yung isa pang hindi na
I forgot. I mean, the names escape me now.
Congressman Abante.
No. Congressman is not with the prosecution team.
Okay.
On the part of the private prosecutors, there are about an equal amount of number. more or less.
So 24 for the
more or less, give or take.
prosecution team
Give or take.
versus the 16 of the defense.
This is not a question of numbers. It's a question of evidence.
But it really is reasonable to have that much lawyers because
It is.
it is a fact that's been thrown around,
It is.
taken against the vice president, saying that she's
Yes.
guilty for having a lot of lawyers. So normal lang yun.
It is.
Sa ganito.
Well, number one, you get a lot of lawyers because you can afford a lot of lawyers. That's the number one question. That's the number one circumstance. You may want to have a lot of lawyers, but you cannot afford them. You can afford only one or two. Then, apparently, obviously, she can afford 16. But let's not judge that. There are insinuations I've heard from some other sources that the more lawyers you have, the more guilty you appear. Well, that may be right. That may be erroneous, depending on
Or reading too much into it.
Yeah, if you read too much into it. Same thing with the prosecution. It's not a question of numbers.
Okay, the vice president's team has said that there are no articles of impeachment because these were referred back to the House of Representatives and they could not respond.
They're being literal about the return of the articles. That's a legal impossibility. The articles of impeachment remain with the Senate. It has neither been dismissed. It has not been, it has not been dismissed. So the articles remain in place.
With the Senate.
In the Senate and parenthetically.
But it has been sent back to remanded. To
It is
the House
not
of
a
Representatives,
literal
right?
return, It was returned because they imposed an unusual requirement, which is the certification that the House did not violate the Constitution.
That's the first one.
That's the first. And the second, an affirmation that the succeeding Congress, the 20th Congress, will pursue the articles of impeachment. These are all unusual requirements.
So what happens now? This will not proceed without the confirmation from the 20th
It will
Congress?
proceed. Like I said, I previously said, we are bending over backwards. The prosecution is bending over backwards. The House is bending over backwards. Notwithstanding the absurdity of the requirement, the House passed a resolution on the last day of plenary satisfying the first requirement.
Okay.
And given the current composition of the incoming Congress, the 20th, there's no doubt that the second condition would be
Hindi naman po
satisfied.
talaga magtutuloy, kasi wala ring plenary session sa ngayon. Tama po ba?
No.
Kumbaga parang pagkatapos po ng SONA, pagdating ng July, yun ang unang pag-uusapan at isi-certify ng 20th Congress.
Hindi matutuloy not because the impeachment court is suspended. The impeachment court continues. Notwithstanding the Senate and Congress being on recess, awaiting the convening of the 20th Congress. Hindi siya susulong at this time because we cannot, as of yet, satisfy the second requirement, which is the affirmation that I spoke of. And that can be...
And what if they don't want to affirm that? What if they do not want to proceed and they deem this unconstitutional, crossing over to another Congress? What happens then?
The House of Representatives has no option but to proceed. They cannot withdraw. They cannot say, no, we don't want to pursue this. Their constitutional duty was performed and accomplished when they transmitted the articles. They cannot withdraw this. That is unconstitutional. That is beyond their mandate under the Constitution.
But what if Congress votes not to continue? What happens?
It is a constitutional impossibility. They cannot do it. So it's useless for us to
Pero marami rin pong nagawa na kumbaga, parang unconstitutional din.
But this
yung pagde-delay.
But this is within the control of Congress. What you're pointing out are delays caused by the impeachment court and by the impeached official. Congress can never constitutionally withdraw the articles. It is not within their mandate. Their task, constitutional task, was
So
performed
what
when
if
they
we change the
transmitted.
term? What if it's not actually withdrawn, but the matter of the impeachment ends with the 19th Congress?
But that's not even an issue now.
So everybody, do you think everybody's on the same page?
We're on the same
that
page.
This will be
This will
carried
be
over to
this
the
will be
next.
taken up by the succeeding Congress. And by Congress,
even the Senate is.
when I speak of Congress, I speak of the combined houses.
So everybody's on the same page.
Yes.
Na matutuloy po itong
Yes.
trial na ito. Okay.
This impeachment court has not said otherwise. In fact, they affirmed that we're not dismissing this.
I want to go to one of the main arguments of the Vice President, which is the one-year constitutional ban that the fourth impeachment complaint actually circumvented. She's arguing that the House Secretary General delayed transmittal of the first 3 impeachment complaints to the Speaker's office for 2 months. Thus making it the fourth one unconstitutional. Or hindi po ba, paano po ba ma-justify ng House yung pagde-delay na yun?
The Secretary General is not has no deadline when to give it to the.
But
there's no. Let me finish.
Okay, go ahead.
The Secretary General, there's no fixed period for him within which to give this submit this to the office of the Speaker. The Speaker of the House, on the other hand, has a 10-day deadline to refer this to plenary. Okay, that 10-day deadline. With respect to the first 3 complaints, fell within the 10-session day deadline. The first impeachment complaint was filed on December 2nd, 2024. The last impeachment complaint, which is the fourth, the one pending now, was filed on February 5. If the first impeachment complaint fell within the 10-day period, necessarily the 2 succeeding impeachment complaints that were filed by Makabayan and by the civil society, the clergy and the religious, fell within the 10-day session period. Okay? The fourth impeachment complaint did not have to go through referral to the Committee on Justice because it garnered more than the 1/3 minimum required. Such that the Constitution says once the endorsement of at least 1/3 is achieved, the complaint becomes the articles of impeachment. And this can be transmitted to the Senate as the articles of impeachment. So the 10-day session period was complied by not only by the first 3 complaints, but including the current fourth impeachment complaint, which is pending.
But doesn't it say in the Constitution that the SecGen should have transmitted the impeachment complaint to the Speaker's office immediately?
That is not in the Constitution.
Immediately?
That is not in the Constitution. It's in the House rules on impeachment. See, the House rules, the House has its own set of rules regarding impeachment proceedings. The Senate has their own own rules. The House is plenary when it comes to interpreting their own rules. That's part of their rule-making body, part of their internal rules. Not even the Supreme Court will intrude into that.
Kung baga kayo nag-uusap dyan.
No, yes.
Kung ibig sabihin ng immediately,
Just
para
like,
sa inyo ay sa
yes,
inyo.
just like the internal rules of the Senate, we cannot intrude into that. We cannot interpret I mean, by we, I don't mean we, I mean the House.
Yeah, yes.
The House cannot intrude into that. And vice versa. In much the same way, in a line of decided cases, the Supreme Court will not intrude into the rule-making body, internal rule-making body of a co-equal branch of government. Unless there are constitutional digressions.
What do you mean?
There are constitutional violations, but here there's none.
Because if you put it side by side with forthwith, right?
Oh, yeah. But, yeah, forthwith is in the Constitution. It's not just in the internal rules. So it's a constitutional mandate. You cannot ignore that.
So this will proceed?
This will proceed, absolutely. And it should. Because the institutions are on trial.
What do you make of the move of senator judges to file motions?
That has been discussed to death. Judges cannot do that. I'm sure you're referring to some of the...
Are you going to ask some senator judges to
recuse?
inhibit? Yeah.
No, we leave it to their judgment.
Hindi na.
Hindi na. That will...
Even if, I mean, the arguments of the Vice President in their response sound similar to the motions of some senators.
Listen. They say that the Vice President has the numbers. Okay? She has her own lawyers within the impeachment court. Legal, pundits say that. That being the case, why is she digressing from the factual allegations at hand? Why is she relying on procedural technicalities? If she thinks she has the numbers, she will be acquitted. So why don't you present your evidence? Right? Does that make sense?
What if the Supreme Court says that, or rules that this is unconstitutional?
Then
could that ruling stop the trial?
the Supreme Court is the supreme arbiter.
But it is a co-equal branch, right?
Yes, but they're the final arbiter of constitutional questions. There are pending petitions now with the Supreme Court filed by the Vice President to stop the impeachment proceedings. They asked for a preliminary. They prayed for an injunction. It was not granted. They subsequently filed a supplemental petition. They sought the issuance of a TRO. Still no action.
At kasabay ho nito, biglang gumalaw po yung ombudsman, ano?
Yes.
Na sinasabi po sa Vice President na sumagot sila answering to these charges. And there's that whole debate. Senator Laila de Lima, former Senator Laila de Lima, expressed her concern.
Oh yeah, we are concerned
about that office
We
na
are
baka
concerned.
ma-dismiss yung mga charges even before this trial is held.
No. The charges, you mean the charges in the impeachment court?
No.
What
the
charges?
The criminal case.
But the ombudsman cannot even intrude into this proceedings. He cannot initiate this preliminary investigation. Why? Under the Ombudsman Act, Republic Act 6770, there's a provision there that says the ombudsman can exercise disciplinary authority over public officials, elective, appointed, officials of government-owned and controlled corporations, officials of the LGUs, except impeachable officers. Except officers who can only be removed by impeachment. Members of Congress are also excluded. The judiciary are also excluded. Why? There are independent mechanisms to discipline members of Congress.
Which is the impeachment process?
No. They have their own mechanism. They have their committee on, they have their ethics committee, their committee on discipline. So in other words, they have their own independent mechanism. Same with the Supreme Court. There's the Office of the Court Administrator that hears administrative cases against erring judges. But I'm referring in particular to officers who can be removed only by impeachment, like the Vice President. That's an exception to the rule that the Ombudsman exercises disciplinary authority. Okay? The only instance when the Ombudsman can conduct a preliminary investigation of an impeachable officer if it is for the purpose of filing a verified impeachment complaint, if warranted by the investigation. Why is this so? The Ombudsman is provided with reports of investigations conducted by the House apropos of government officials.
Which is binigyan nga po daw siya, di ba, na report.
Yes, that is the reason why.
Kaya niya binuksan ito na pinapasagot niya si
But that is again overstretching his authority. He is provided reports occasionally, or if not regularly, by the committee or committees, respective committees of Congress, so that he could do an assessment on whether or not to pursue a complaint. Okay? but not with respect to impeachable officers. When he was given this report regarding the investigations conducted by the Quadcom, it was part of the, for your information, practice by the committees of the House of Representatives. It was not a complaint. It was unusual for him to treat this as a complaint and name Congressman Joel Chua as the complainant because he was the chairman. So he was also, caught about, why? I'm not a complainant.
So saan po niya, yung sinasabi po niyo na limitado ang kanyang kapangyarihan dito sa mga non-impeachable
Yes.
officers, saan po mahahanap po yan?
Nasa Republic Act 6770, the Ombudsman Act.
Okay.
This is the law that created the Ombudsman. This is the law that defined the powers
So
of the
what should
Ombudsman.
the Ombudsman do? What if he dismisses this?
He cannot.
He cannot.
He cannot. He should back off. Let the impeachment trial proceed. Because the mandate is, because the House of Representatives has the exclusive power to initiate
But if he
impeachment.
does pursue
He's liable
if he
for
does-
violating the law.
the prosecution, the trial will continue.
Trial will continue. He cannot stop this. He should back off. He should desist. That is that's the legal way of
We do know that the
responding to this.
Ombudsman, Samuel Martinez, is retiring this July. So
That even makes this interesting, considering his track record.
before the 20th Congress begins, does that happen before the Congress begins?
I think he retires sometime in mid-July. I'm not.
So that's before the
Yes.
20th Congress begins.
Yeah.
All right. Interesting developments here from different sides. But thank you so much for explaining all of that to us. So it's a very, very legalese and
I
technical
tried to translate
on many
it.
ends.
I tried to translate it in a language more digestible.
And is that your role here?
My role is to convey the message, to explain it.
Kasi hindi naiintindihan po ng Pilipino.
We have to make them understand. We have to insist that the public should understand.
Ano po ba dapat namin maintindihan ng publiko?
Maintindihan ano
Dito sa matter of impeachment.
dapat maintindihan ng publiko. Ano ang proseso ng impeachment? Ito ay mekanismo ng ating saligang batas para sa pananagutan. Kaya yung titulo niya, the title is Accountability of Public Officers. What's the first item? Impeachment. The process was defined. The process was laid out. Mahalaga ito, this is not just a political exercise. It is not a political exercise. It is an exercise for holding a public official, the highest public officials, accountable.
Nung nilapitan po kayo, ano pong sinabi po nila? Your role, hindi po ba naiintindihan ng Pilipino yon? If you take a look at the recent results of the elections, it seems to be that impeachment did not really come across very well. And it was, to my interpretation, was seen as politicking.
I wouldn't say it was seen as politicking, perhaps to some people, but it was not in the platform by any of the candidates. So how can it be discussed? Wala sa plataforma ng kahit sinong kandidato eh.
Iniwasan.
Hindi sa iniwasan kasi ang politics sa Pilipinas is personality-based, not platform-based. I don't know if you'll agree with that. But that's how I see it. Why is it personality-based? That's the only reason we get actors elected into office. It is personality-based. It's name recall.
And yet, the Duterte camp was seen as saying, puro politika lang iniisip ito. Distraction to sa mga pagtaas ng bilihin, sa budget, sa paglulustay ng budget, sa kakulangan sa edukasyon.
That's a warrantless generalization. Pag wala kang matuhog na particular, i-generalize mo. You confuse the public. You smoke screen.
Pero bakit nga ba hindi inimbestigahan ng Office of the President pagdating sa paggamit naman ng confidential funds? Yun din ang kanilang isinasambit.
Hindi naman well, you mean by the Office of the President, you mean the...
Mas maraming confidential funds ang Office of the President.
The President is not on trial here. That's a separate issue that we should deal with. Hindi ho yan, wag natin ihahalo dito yan. Again, that's bemuddling the issue eh. Ang nasasakdal dito ay ang pangalawang pangulo. Huwag nating guluhin. Kasi if we start finger pointing, mas malaki tinanggap nun, mas malaki ginastos nun. Kayong lahat. Teka muna, ikaw ang nasasakdal eh. Sagutin mo ito. Ba't mo ihahambing ang sarili mo sa ibang tao? Sasabihin mo, hindi, mas malaki kinuha niya kaysa akin. So, that makes it right? Does that make it right? No. Ang nagnakaw, nagnakaw. Ang dapat managot, managot. Kaya piso yan o hindi. Kung naaalala nyo, may isang maestra, isang guro, na nakadispalko ng 5,000. 5,000. Kinonvict. Ikinulong. Ito 612 million. Pag hindi ka naman ng gigil, where's the fairness there? Sa halagang 5,000, ikinulong mo,
Hindi po ba
kinonvict
ganun
mo?
din ang ginagawa sa budget natin? Na pinapasukan ng maraming insertion sa ayuda?
Ibang usapin yan. Hindi dapat natin ihalo dito yan. Ang usapin ngayon ay ang pagpapanagot sa pangalawang pangulo. Ito may ebidensya. Hindi ito haka-haka eh. We're not second-guessing here. Yung mga appropriation, maraming explanation, maraming haka-haka. Magpapagulo yan ang usapin na ito. Dito tayo tumutok. Ito muna. Ito ngayon ang is on the table. Ito yung pag-usapan natin.
Pumasok po kayo sa gitna ng kaguluhan. Para po sa mga nagtataka, saan ang galing si Atty. Bukoy?
Kung ito yung kapalaran, edi so be it. Kung makakatulong ako sa proseso, tinatanggap po ang responsibilidad.
Have you heard of possible spokesperson for the defense?
No, wala akong
Wala. Kayo lang?
Wala akong naririnig. Wala akong naririnig.
Okay.
And it doesn't matter. Actually, it doesn't matter. Ang importante is my message. Ang importante is for me to educate the public, to understand this process.
What will be the role of Shell Jokno and Laila de Lima
They
here?
will be part of the prosecution group.
Will they be, how will the roles be designated?
We are still discussing this on where they will fit.
Oo.
Which articles they will take care of.
So, ma-assign po yung several lawyers per article impeachment?
Yes, that's the
Of
general
impeachment.
idea. That's the general idea.
How many lawyers per article of impeachment?
I don't have the exact numbers, but at least 2 per
At least
article.
2.
At least.
And will we be hearing from them in this trial?
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. All right. We will hopefully we get to that trial, as you mentioned.
We will and we should. We will and we should.
This coming July.
Yes.
Given all of the extraordinary developments over in the House of Representatives and the Senate. In the meantime, maraming salamat. We have the spokesperson for the prosecution panel in the upcoming impeachment trial, Attorney Antonio Bukoy. And that wraps up today's episode of Morning Matters. We hope we've given you the right start to your morning. Let's go ahead and make the day matter. My name is Gretchen Ho. We are One News, all sides, all the time.